Another midterm election, but are California's voters engaged and paying attention? There are fewer but still significant ballot measures to consider. And the legislative seats up for grabs could alter the look of the California legislature. With Governor Brown well ahead in his race for an unprecedented fourth term, the state's down-ticket races are getting more attention than normal. So who are California's likely voters? And where are they leaning on the various races and propositions as the election nears? We'll discuss the upcoming November election with Mark Baldassare of the Public Policy Institute of California and Dan Walters, political columnist for the Sacramento Bee. California's 2014 election, plenty of reasons to vote.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From the California Channel at the state capitol, Valley PBS, and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. Our guest is Mark Baldassare, President and CEO of the Public Policy Institute of California, who directs the PPIC statewide survey, a large-scale public opinion project designed to develop an in-depth profile of the social, economic, and political forces at work in California elections. So we're delighted to have you back on the Maddy Report.
It's nice to be here.
So you've been tracking voter registration for some time. Have you noticed any significant shifts or trends?
There are a couple of them that come to mind. One is that we have seen an increasing number of Latinos in particular, also Asian Americans, but Latinos more than any other group in terms of racial and ethnic change. And then in terms of party identification, we've seen an increasing number of voters who are no party preference.
So what's happening to the Republicans and the Democrats?
Shrinking. Republicans shrinking more than Democrats. The last Secretary of State report showed that the number of Republicans in the state had declined to 28%. The number of Republicans then compared to a few years ago down 2 points. Number of Democrats also down 1 point from 44 to 43%, and now there are 23% of Californians who describe themselves as no party preference.
But those trends have been going on, not just for the last few years, but for a while, haven't they?
Yeah, there seemed to be a little bit of an acceleration in it as I looked at the numbers. And if you think about what this means, if you've got 28% Republicans and 23% no party preference, and increase of 3 points but from 2010 in the independents, if they increase another 3 points in 4 years, which would be by 2018, and Republicans continue to decline, we could have more people who are no party preference in California than registered as Republicans.
Republicans become the third party in the state. Well, what about, likely voters? Not all registered voters vote. So what are the characteristics of the likely voter?
The likely voter tends to be older, more affluent, better educated, more likely to be a homeowner, to have lived in their residence for some period of time, and more likely to be white.
So I cringe a little bit when you say older, because I think you define that as 55 and above.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Likely voters, of course, vary from election to election, but we look at people who are just what we describe as frequent voters. And they have a profile that's different from the average Californian.
So what about things like demographic characteristics like ethnicity among likely voters? For example, Latinos.
Yeah. So, we see maybe around 18% of Latinos, we see about 18% Latino voters in our election profiles, and that tends to be a number which has been fairly stable over the last few years, hasn't grown a lot, but is sharply lower than what the potential is of
What's the
Latinos
potential?
in the population. Well, the potential could be as much as, in somewhere in the low 30s, if you look at what the population profile is. But certainly a combination of whether you're talking about immigration status as well as just people who still have the potential to register to vote, we expect that will be the fastest growing group of voters.
So your studies show that Latinos, while they generally vote Democratic, there's a large majority, I'm not saying majority, there's a large number, percentage, that view themselves as conservative.
Yeah.
So why the disconnect? You'd think they'd be registering as Republicans.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think the challenge for the Republican Party in California is really around immigration policy. And for the last 2 decades, the Republicans in California have not been able to attract Latino voters, even moderate to conservative Latino voters, because overwhelmingly, Latino voters have been in favor of a path to citizenship, and the Republican Party nationally and earlier in the state was not in favor. Was in favor, had a more of a harsh tone around undocumented immigrants, and that's really hurt Republican registration of Latinos.
Okay, well, up next, we're going to talk about the rise of the independent voter and what's the likely impact on this November's election. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Mark Baldassare, head of the nonprofit and nonpartisan PPIC, who publishes the well-respected PPIC statewide survey. Let's talk about the ever-increasing independent voters. What did your statewide survey find out about this independent voter?
They tend to be younger than the overall voter profile. They tend to be more likely than male than female as well. And they tend to be fairly highly educated and middle to upper middle income, and they most of them describe themselves as moderate politically. Most Republicans describe themselves conservative, many Democrats liberal. I think what's different about independents is they put themselves in the middle of the political spectrum.
And it's interesting, that's a growing trend. I think your studies show that from 1994 to today, it's about 11% increase.
Yeah,
it's pretty significant.
It's been a huge change, and now we've got the top 2 primaries, so you know, another reason why people don't have to register as Republican or Democratic. Most younger voters don't really affiliate with a party. Most new voters, who tend to be younger, are registering as no party preference.
It's interesting. I was talking to a political pundit, and he was saying that it's actually might be better for folks to put an I next to their name as an R, but it might be easier to attract voters statewide that way. Well, let's talk about the electorate generally. What is their feeling going into this election, and has it changed since 2010 and 12, and what impact on the election?
Yeah. So the mood is much more positive than it was in 2012, and especially in 2010. More people saying the state's going in the right direction, more people saying that they expect the economy to be in good shape over the course of the next year, and fewer people saying the state's budget situation is a problem, and fewer people saying the economy is the state's biggest problem. The new problem that's emerged is water. You know, that's the number two issue now. So that's a big change.
Right behind jobs in the economy.
Right behind jobs in the economy. It's the number 2 issue. In some parts of the state,
it is jobs in the economy.
Well,
I want to ask you quickly about the California propositions. Anything surprise you there in your polling?
Yeah, you know, Proposition 2, which is the rainy day fund, but it's not called the rainy day fund on the ballot. We had less than 50% support. That surprised me, because whenever we've asked about rainy day funds, it gets very strong support. But of the 4 measures we asked about, Prop 47, which would reduce some criminal sentences from felonies to misdemeanors, had the most support, 62%. So maybe that surprised me even more than anything else, was that we are really at a point in time where people are warming up to the idea of changing our criminal justice system in California.
It looks like a big change from the 3 strikes of, you know, put them away, and now it's like it's costing us too much. Maybe we need to think of some other ideas.
It's all about the cost and the fact that crime, only 2% say it's the biggest problem facing the state.
Wow, 2%. Yeah. Okay, last question. We only have about a minute left in this segment. I want to ask you about the races in November. Which statewide office is the most competitive?
Probably the nonpartisan race for superintendent of public schools, in which a Democrat will face a Democrat, although neither of them are describing themselves as Democrats. But that's the one that seems to, have attracted the most attention right now. But people are looking at the controller's race because you don't have incumbents running in that race as well.
So 2 close races to watch. Well, I want to thank Mark Baldassare for being here. Up next, we're going to talk with the Capitol's one of the Capitol's most respected political observers, Dan Walters from the Sacramento Bee. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're now joined by Dan Walters, veteran Capitol observer and political columnist for the Sacramento Bee. Welcome back to the Maddy Report, Dan.
Thank you.
Well, Governor Brown appears to have a commanding lead over the Republican nominee, Neil Kashkari, but one statewide race that's turning out to be quite competitive is the race for state superintendent between Tom Torlakson and Marshall Tuck. They're both Democrats, as a matter of fact. It's statistically basically a dead heat. It's attracting a lot of money. What are the issues that are driving the interest in this race?
I think what's not driving the race, and maybe the interest in the race as well, is that it is the front in a much larger battle in California over the direction of public education. Marshall Tuck represents the insurgent part of this battle. He's being promoted and financed by people who have been fighting this battle for years and years, mostly wealthy Democrats, as a matter of fact, who believe that this public school system of California needs to go into a different direction, to become more flexible, less hidebound, encourage charter schools, encourage more parental involvement and so forth. And then Mr. Torlakson represents the establishment, the education establishment. He is the education establishment, former teacher, very closely aligned with the California Teachers Association. And this battle has been fought on a number of fronts for a number of years. It's been fought in the legislature over legislation. It's been fought at the local level, and it's been fought even today is already still being fought at the state school board over regulations that will govern the new financing formula that puts more money into schools with poor children. And this is just another front in that war.
And we've got that L.A. case.
That's part of it. The case, I should say, well, one of the other fronts is in the courts. The decision by a judge in Los Angeles that the teacher tenure system is unconstitutional. The battles, other court battles that are pending, one over whether the California Teachers Association can continue to get money from teachers for their political activities. I mean, this is a war that's been going on, I'd say, to one degree or intensity another, for 2 or 3 decades in California. And they have fought, and they have fought, and they have fought. Sometimes one side wins, sometimes the other side wins. This is just the latest battle.
Well, we have another interesting race for Secretary of State with Republican Pete Peterson against Democrat Alex Padilla. What are the differences in that race?
There actually are not an awful lot of differences. The two candidates agree, basically, that the Secretary of State's office is not operating well and needs a big overhaul. They don't even particularly disagree on what that should be, that they need better technology, that they need to be more attentive, more customer friendly. They need to clean up the systems that of access to campaign data and that sort of thing. So there's not an awful lot that separates the two ideologically or in prescriptions for the office. It all boils down to kind of, I guess, a personality thing. Mr. Padilla is obviously a politician. He's a state senator. Mr. Peterson's kind of a non-politician, so it kind of boils down to that and so forth. It's interesting only in that the office clearly does need a lot of change, and both of them are proposing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Pew Charitable Trust ranked California's election performance 49th, so change needs to have happened there. Let's go down and talk about some other down-ticket Republican races. You've got Swearingen running for state controller. Are these down-ticket races really more of a test run for maybe running for the Senate in 2016 or the governor's race in 2018? Or are they viable candidates?
Yes, I think that all of these down ballot constitutional officers, as they're called, are basically stepping stone offices. You step from office to office to office. For example, Gray Davis, who was governor before he was recalled, had been lieutenant governor. He had been state controller, and then he'd been a state legislature. So there's a kind of a ladder in this, and these constitutional offices are a ladder. Jerry Brown was Secretary of State.
Bill Lockyer did a lot
Bill Lockyer's been in a couple of these different offices. So yeah, that's the import of it. It's not. Yes, they might have something to do once they get in office, but mostly they kind of plot and scheme of how to run for other offices.
It's interesting. The Republicans are nominating some people that consider to have more moderate views, like Pete Peterson and Ashley Swearingen. Is the Republican Party kind of trying to change its image, maybe moving a little bit away from the Tea Party? Is the Tea Party losing its grip?
I think that the leadership of the Republican Party, such as it is trying to change. They realize that demography is not their friend, that if they don't start getting some voters among Latinos and among other non-white groups, among the younger voters, that they're doomed. Their voter registration's down to about 28% now, and they've got to make change. However, there is resistance to that change. Not so much Tea Party. The Tea Party is a fairly recent phenomenon. This is really kind of an old battle within the Republican Party. It goes back to 50s and 60s, as a matter of fact. And the party...
Well, it's not quite the Goldwater-Rockefeller split, but...
It's kind of like the Goldwater-Rockefeller split. It's between the people who believe that you have to adhere to principle regardless of the outcome of the election, and the people who believe that you need to be more flexible, more moderate, kind of like Ken Maddy was, as a matter of fact. And that was one of the fights that he fought when he was in office as well. So it's an old battle. This is just the newest incarnation of it, but there is some urgency about it because the Republicans have fallen to such a low state in the state.
What do you think the Democrats' chances are of winning back supermajorities or keeping supermajorities in the Assembly and Senate?
I think their chances of retaining the supermajority in the Assembly are pretty good. They have 2 seats that are at risk, but the Republicans have a seat or 2 that's also at risk. And I kind of think that's probably going to wash out, that the 55 seats they have now is going to wind up 55 or 54. The Senate's a different kettle of fish. The numbers kind of work against the Democrats. Remember, only half the senators are up every 2 years. This happens to be the cycle in which the Republicans have a chance to make some gains. And also the redistricting plan that was done by a redistricting commission a few years ago takes effect for half of the Senate just this year. For example, that redistricting shifts 1 seat from Democrats to Republicans automatically. It shifts a seat from San Francisco over into the interior part of California that will be Republican. So Republicans are assured of 1 seat gain. They've already picked up another in a special election. And they are favored, not locked in, but favored to win what had been a Democratic seat in Orange County. If that happens, then the supermajority vanishes in Sacramento.
So focus on the California Senate races, I guess. Well, when we come back, we'll talk about some interesting propositions on the November ballot. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. We're talking with political columnist Dan Walters. There are fewer initiatives on the ballot than normal, but they still could have a significant impact on public policy. One big one is the big one, a $7.5 billion water bond. Despite its size, though, it takes pains to distance itself from the governor's Twin Tunnels project. So I assume that was because of political necessity. But doesn't that ensure that this is just a partial fix and that we're going to be revisiting water issues in the next several years?
We have been visiting water issues for 150 years in California, and we will probably continue to visit water issues for the next 150 years. One little correction, it's not an initiative. It's a ballot measure, but it's not an initiative because it was placed on by the legislature. And you have to kind of differentiate that. No, it's just another step in one of this medieval war over water in California, and it'll never be resolved. All you can do is make incremental changes and hope that it kind of eases the situation for a while until the next conflict comes up. This water bond is really a pretty small part of the picture. It basically does a lot of things that probably need to be done, and it probably will pass, that the polls indicate it'll probably pass, but it's not the big water fix, because there is no big water fix. That's kind of like chasing the Holy Grail that you'll never find. So it does a few things, and we won't know whether it does the right things for decades, basically, because that's how water works. It's a long process. But the Twin Tunnel project is another potential fix, although it's very controversial, as everyone knows. And then there are also looming battles over groundwater regulation. That's another thing the legislature did this year. And also, down the line, there's going to be a battle over water rights. I mean, the water rights that have been handed out by the state over the last century, about 3 times as much as there is water.
Right.
And so all of these things are parts of a very complex puzzle. In the meantime, you have to deal with weather, which you can't really predict. There's a new study out that says that what would happen to California if this was a 75-year drought? Believe it or not, we would survive, according to the study. So it just goes on and on and on and on. It's a process, not a product. So this is part of the process.
So we'll call it drops in the bucket, or
Right.
drop in the bucket. Okay, let's talk about Prop 2, the Rainy Day Fund. A lot of people are surprised that it doesn't have more support. I think it's polling at about 43% support at this point. But yet people say the state budget is a problem, the budget process is a big problem, but not a lot of support for Prop 2. Why is that?
Well, it hasn't been developed. There's been no campaign for it, for one thing. It's a complex thing. It's not a simple thing. It's a proposed fix to the state's budget volatility, the fact that tax revenues go up and down very widely because of the economy changes, and also we are very, very dependent on a handful of wealthy people. 1% of California's taxpayers finance a third of the entire state budget. And their fortunes are tied to the stock market. So they go up and down, the budget revenue goes up and down, and this is a fix to put money away so that when it goes down, you have money to cushion. There's some real legitimate questions about whether it's enough of a fix or whether it's simply a symbolic gesture. In the meantime, the voters don't know. Yes, the budget's a big problem. Is this the right fix? And until somebody actually convinces them, they're going to be a little skeptical.
So let's talk about Prop 45. That proposition talks about the insurance premiums being regulated by the insurance commissioner. The proponents say, listen, rates have gone up 185% since 2002, 5 times the rate of inflation. The 35 other states have similar measures. We don't in California. So what's the argument against 45?
That we already have rate regulation essentially from 2 other state agencies, Covered California, which operates Obamacare, and the state's Department of Managed Care, which oversees HMOs. And basically, this is a turf battle. The insurance commissioner has been kind of frozen out because so much of healthcare now is either comes under Obamacare or comes under managed care, and he doesn't play a role in those things. He only really gets to regulate individual healthcare policies, which are a declining part of the business. He wants to enlarge his empire to include some other things, and he has the assistance of an organization down in Southern California that has benefited tremendously from so-called intervener fees from his office and other rate cases, and this would give them an opportunity to get new intervener fees. So there's a legitimate question as to whether this is just an empire building or whether it's a needed rate regulation authority.
But Covered California tries to negotiate rates. It can't regulate rates, correct?
It doesn't directly regulate rates, but in the process of negotiating those rates, it basically sets the standard. And the people that Covered California, they're not officially opposed to it, but they are basically expressing great displeasure about somebody trying to get in on their turf.
Quick comments about 2 other propositions I wanted to talk about. One was Prop 46, and that increases the medical negligence award from $250,000, which was set in 1975, to $1.1 million. And they came up with that number based on the rate of inflation since 1975. Fair, necessary? I guess it depends on what side of the fence you're sitting on.
I suppose, it depends on what side of the fence. This is the latest effort, essentially, by the trial lawyers' lobby to change this cap on non-economic damages, pain and suffering damages, from $250,000 that was set in 1975, under a bill signed by Jerry Brown, by the way.
Which I think he regrets. He sent a note, I think in the 90s, that's saying he thought maybe he made a mistake when he signed that measure.
Well, if you're interested in historical trivia, the proponents of that offered to put a cost of living escalator in the legislation back in 1975, and the trial lawyer lobby turned it down because they thought the whole thing would be thrown out by the courts and it would be easier, or it'd be easier to beat it in a referendum. So they turned that down, and now they've regretted that for the last 39 years.
That's an oops moment. What about 47, which reduces some crimes from felonies to misdemeanors? Is that really proof that the cost of incarceration is becoming more important than the tough on crime narrative?
This is an effort by criminal justice reformers, opposed by the police, by the way, and the law enforcement community, most of it anyway, not all of it, most of it. It's trying to do some things that have been proposed in the legislature over the years that have not been successful, because most legislators don't want to buck the law enforcement community. So one side says it's reform, the other side is going to say it's going to go soft on crime. So take your pick.
Okay, well, I'm going to thank Dan Walters for joining us, as well as Mark Baldassare, President and CEO of the Public Policy Institute of California. If you are concerned about state and local politics, you can sign up for our free and award-winning e-newsletter, The Maddy Daily, by logging onto our website at maddyinstitute.org.
And now, another perspective.
People don't often ask me for advice on political candidates. Yes, candidates can deceive with ads about meaningless votes. Yes, they can use all the tricks in the public relations tool chest to make themselves appear to be the single greatest person on planet Earth. But voters are comfortable forming opinions about candidates. Voters trust their instincts. This isn't true for propositions, and in California, propositions have the potential to change your life in significant ways, for better and for worse. People ask me all the time about propositions because they are confusing, and they are words written on paper. They're not candidates shaking your hand and earnestly asking you for your vote. My advice on propositions is always the same. If you aren't thoroughly convinced that a proposition will make your life better, vote no. It's really as simple as that. When researching the propositions, ignore all advertising and check out what the nonpartisan analysts have to say. If you have even a sliver of doubt, vote no. No, 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 no. Have I made myself clear? This is Bill McEwen for the Maddy Report.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddy Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddy Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddy.
This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.